Well, good morning, everyone. It is great to be with you here on day two. I was talking to a colleague yesterday evening who wasn't here, and I was trying to explain to him where I was, and he was like, "Are you at a conference?" I'm like, "It ain't really a conference, right? Well, are there academics? I mean, it's me and Emily, right?" So it's always some special stuff when we come down here. I'm Hasan Kwame Jeffries. I teach history at the Ohio State University. There's a lot of these thrown around, but I don't know how many other these are actually on their checks. But it shows up on my check. But I'm also a proud graduate. I love the session yesterday evening. I got to hear the first half of it because I'm also a proud graduate of Morehouse College. There we go. You gotta love those HBCUs, right? Some of those conversations we can have in polite conversation, but some of them we just need to have when nobody else is around, right? So it really has been an inspiration. There was some discussion, and this morning's panel is entitled "The Power to Define." Midnight versus 3 a.m. I'm going to say a little bit something about that midnight and 3 a.m. to provide some clarity for what it is that we're actually talking about. But I'm joined here by Phil Agnew. Everyone here knows who we're talking about, but Phil Agnew, of course, who was over Black Men Build to my immediate left. Trey Murphy, organizing Black in Baltimore, to his left. Tiffany, who's working right now to organize black stewardesses, to organize all stewardesses, right, on flight attendants on at Delta Airlines, and Dee Dee Jackson with BYP 100. We started a little late, so I'll just, Dee Dee has a phone call, an important call to make, to be a part of at 10:30, so she'll be tiptoeing out because we'll go to the bottom of the hour. So I'll just let you, just please be advised of that. The power to define and this question of midnight versus 3 a.m. On your packets was this wonderful card, and if you attach to the bag, and for those who had a chance to read it towards the end of that, it was almost like a vision statement. There is a reference to something that N.C. Foote said, and it says, N.C. Foote reflected that times are dark right now. Amen to that, right? Times are dark right now, because we are in the final throes of white supremacy. The death throes, like the final beats. I mean, it's people who are gasping to cling to white supremacy. We are in the final throes of white supremacy. But it's not midnight dark. Interesting. It's not midnight dark. It's 3 a.m. dark. We are looking forward to a new horizon and a new day. There's a difference between midnight dark and 3 a.m. dark, right? This reminded me of that first verse in Lift Every Voice and Sing, right? Facing the rising sun until our new day begun. The question is, and I think if we understand the freedom movement, if we understand the struggle for freedom as a continuum, as Brother Cortland points out, right? As a continuum. This isn't something that begins yesterday. This is something that black folk have been fighting for their freedom since the moment we arrived on these shores. It's a continuum. Then we understand that this is ongoing. And we understand as well, and this is the midnight versus 3 a.m. We understand as well, there are moments where we have achieved great things. Like the progress is real. Cortland was sharing last night that he's receiving all these calls and interviews about 1963 and the March on Washington, and the conversation was revolving so much around about wasn't that the high point of the movement, right? Look where we are now versus where we were then. Has progress been achieved? And of course, progress has been achieved, right? I mean, you wouldn't have had a Barack Obama. You wouldn't have had, just on the most base level, the potential next Speaker of the House of Representatives wouldn't be who he is if there wasn't for progress. He's a good-looking guy. But if we just go back a few years to 2008, when Barack Obama was elected, that narrative of, well, we haven't done anything was completely different, right? It was, now, aren't we post-racial now, right? Haven't we overcome? It wasn't 3 a.m. It was like high noon, right? Like this is the, so we've seen a shift just within 15 years. Now that has real implications for how people respond to organizing, to how people respond to critiques of American society, how they understand where we are. And so where I want to begin this conversation is not so much, are we at midnight or 3 a.m.? Because I think we would agree that, you know, in this ongoing struggle, we are making progress, even though there are moments, and of course, where you're going to get that pushback and we lose ground. But we are moving forward, no doubt. But how do we frame it? How do we frame the narrative? How do we frame where we are in this moment? And what do we have to do to make that message clear? So that those who we are trying to organize understand sort of where we are and also what we're up against and how others will try to define the moment in which we live. So Phil, I'll start with you on this end, but then we'll go to Dee Dee on the far end because she's going to leave us very shortly. No, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I'll be here in spirit.
Yep, good. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be on this panel to start the day off with you all, and to be up here with people that I respect a great deal. And yeah, you're gonna get what you asked for. You know, this we didn't have a lot of time to develop thoughts about what we were gonna discuss, and I think that is for the best, because. You know, one of the, you know, this is a time when we think about the power to define. One thing that comes to my mind about this moment is over the last few years, how much the right has sought to muddy what the truth is, muddy what history is, muddy what, you know, how we got here, the story of how we got here. And how that concerted attempt has made it very destabilizing to organize right now. A lot of the work that we're doing with Black Men Build, we're engaging with brothers that they are believing a lot of different things about the reality of the world, and it's very disconcerting to experience right now. And I think one of our primary roles right now is, whether we're deciding what time of we're in right now or not, is to use this as an incredible opportunity to redefine everything. And that's how we see our role with Black Men Build. What we talk about, yes, we want to organize Black men. Yes, we want Black men to be moved to the left. Yes, we want Black men to not be falling prone to conservative and right-wing values and ways of being. And this is an incredible opportunity to redefine what manhood looks like completely. And I think that's an exciting moment to be in for us, something that does make me incredibly excited about this time to redefine what it means to be human, what it means to be a part of an organization that wants to transform the world, to redefine every part of what we know to be true. And I think far too often we have allowed, you know, the right to define the language, the arena, the, you know, everything about what we're up against. So the power to define for us, I think, is not to, it's not, sorry, I don't know, for some reason I'm getting confused. But the power to define for us in this moment is an opportunity, I think, to develop new ways of being completely. not to fall victim to a conservatism or looking back. You know, I often wanted to be like and still want to be like SNCC veterans and Black Panther veterans, et cetera. And I think there's a lot of greatness to be had in emulating that. But to move forward, I think a lot of our folks are going to want to know what are new ways of being, new ways of understanding ourselves, our relationship with one another, and what does it mean to be a human. That's all I have right now. I'm feeling loopy this week, but that's all I have now. Yeah.
And so, Didi, what do you say to those who would suggest that we are in that midnight moment, that there's nothing really that can be done? You know, things are not getting better; they're getting worse. What do you say? What's your response to them? How do you work with that narrative to get them to engage in some type of action?
Firstly, want to thank y'all for having me on this panel, and really appreciate also and honored to be on the panel with folks that I also really love, care about, folks that I would consider my comrades. I think for me, I love talking about Durham. I love talking about this city. I love talking about the work that we've done here. And you all know that where the South goes, everywhere else goes. Y'all know that more than a lot of people. And I think I'll talk about the work that we've been doing in Durham, specifically around the Durham Beyond Policing work, which was a campaign and a coalition between the BYP 100 chapter here in Durham, the Song chapter here in Durham's Southerners on New Ground, and the public sector workers, which we've mentioned currently the solid waste workers in Durham are on strike. And we started a collaboration with them to try to fight against the construction of an $81 million police headquarters here in Durham. Durham is a very progressive city, is one of the most progressive cities in the South. It's a very blue city and a very, very red state. For folks that are in Atlanta and other places, you all know how it is. And one of the things with the unionizing here in North Carolina, because of all of the state sanctions against collective bargaining, there still is a very powerful workforce, but is being hammered by the state and not allowed to collectively bargain at the public sector. And so obviously the folks in UE 150 had been organizing around raising the minimum wage, but here in North Carolina, like many other states, we can't, as a municipality, raise the minimum wage because of the, what are they called? Preemptions. But the cities do have the ability and do have the power to raise the minimum wage for their workers, as do counties. The counties have the ability to raise their minimum wage. And so that's the work that the union has been pushing around. And so when we built this campaign in collaboration with each other, we wanted to be clear that the issue of policing is a systemic one. It isn't just about the police budgets, but it's also our people having the ability to move through the city. And in North Carolina, the minimum wage is $7.25 still. And when we started the campaign, we had this narrative of not building $81 million police headquarters because there were so many other things that you could spend that money on, and one of them being raising the minimum wage. And so we pushed and we organized, we base built, and one of the first wins that we got in 2016, now mind you, this is during Trump's election against Hillary and all of that is happening. And what was one of the first wins that we got as a campaign was for them to stop some of the traffic stops that they were doing, where they park in an elementary school parking lot, pull everybody over. They're looking for folks that don't have ID. They're looking for undocumented folks. That's what they're looking for. And so we pushed for them for the police department and the sheriff's department to stop doing those traffic stops. So that was one of the first wins that we got. That was within the first 3 months of building the campaign. That summer, we ended up winning the minimum wage to be raised for city workers across the city of Durham to $15 an hour by 2019. And obviously, like in hindsight, 2019, having your wages doubled, I mean, it set us up. It set us up. And that's what I believe organizing is meant to do. Like, how can we actually be more prepared and change, make some systemic changes that actually change the material conditions of our people so that they are able to survive just a little bit better. In the push around Durham, for a Durham beyond policing, it also changed how policing was being talked about in the city of Durham when it came to the elections. And so when folks would get these questionnaires, the candidates that's running for city council and for mayor, it wasn't, well, how can we train the police to be better? What are we going to do about body cameras? What are we going to do about the technology? How can we better the technology? How can we better the training for the police? The questions that came from many of the organizations that were issuing these questionnaires to candidates that were running is, do you envision a Durham beyond policing? And that's a different question to ask candidates that are going to have to answer the question about policing. But it's a difference in just a year from the organizing work and being on the ground and talking to people that you're now having to answer, do you envision a Durham that is beyond policing? And what comes of that? And that actually shaped how which candidates we believe would be on our sides, and the ones that we needed to be in our pockets in order to actually win our demands. The fourth thing that we won is that in 2017, Charlottesville happened. Charlottesville, yes, Charlottesville, Virginia. That happened, and a lot of comrades from Durham went up to Charlottesville to stand in solidarity with the folks that were pushing to get this Confederate statue removed and many of the other things that the community of Charlottesville was pushing for. And we came back, and the story that I like to tell is that the community of Durham decided that it was time for our Confederate monument to come down that was placed in downtown Durham. And we held an action that day, and we removed that statue ourselves. And it was a catalyst moment for the country. We saw statues coming down in Columbus, Ohio. We saw statues coming down in Texas, across this country. These symbols of white supremacy, these altars of white supremacy, that folks were taking it in our own hands in reaction, not in reaction to, but in offense to the white supremacy that was also happening at the state level. And many of the folks that were there really, I mean, it was a big win. We were able to go home unscathed at that night. But all of the backlash that came afterwards, where for me, I had to have cameras put up in my house. I lived in an organizer house. It was a house full of organizers. So we had to add our security. The office that I worked at basically had 9 to 5 armed security. Shout out to the white anarchists in this community that held it down for us. And the charges against they were targeting organizers in this moment. I mean, people was getting their homes raided. My car got broken into twice. The police and the sheriff's department was showing up at people's houses, in people's jobs, arresting them. And we all got together and was like, okay, we got to do something. We got to challenge this. We can't just, obviously we knew we were going to do a social media campaign and push to drop the charges, push our DA to drop the charges. And so we got together that night, and this is kind of going back to the idea of narrative, is that we knew that some of our folks were going to go to the Durham County Jail to turn themselves in. And we were like, okay, what support do y'all need? How can we be there? They were like, we just want people to show up. So we were like, okay, we can do that. We can organize and get people to show up. But I was like, let's turn it up a little bit. How can we turn this up? And I was like, essentially, they are getting arrested and getting charged for fighting for white supremacy. Right. And so, how many other people in our community would be willing to stand in solidarity and get arrested for fighting for white supremacy? And the night before, it's like 8 o'clock. We created a Facebook event. We made some flyers, stayed up all night, kind of building this narrative. And Manju, who's an organizer here, was one of the folks that really wrote the narrative of, if these people, our comrades, our community members, are being harassed, being doxxed, being watched, and being charged with fighting for white supremacy, then we all should. And we didn't know how many people would actually show up, obviously. The next morning, we needed people to be there at 9 a.m. We said be there at 9 a.m. in front of the Durham County Jail, and we're all black. And the folks, obviously, that were planning to turn themselves in were also going to be there. And when we got there were over 200 people dressed in black lined up at the jail to get arrested for fighting for white supremacy. And so that was a moment that we got an opportunity to define what we were going to do. Not just being in solidarity with the individuals that were being charged and targeted, but also showcasing that there is a way that we can use the moments that we're in to challenge white supremacy and turn it up just a little bit more. Now, granted, they didn't actually arrest people. They're, white people are going in there like, I am here to get arrested for fighting for white supremacy. And it was great. It was great. It was a beautiful moment. People were dead serious. And, just imagine the clerks, the black women clerks that's like, okay, that's not really how this works. And so we were like, victory. But it was a moment to celebrate. It was a moment for us to be in practice of what we preach. It was a moment for folks that would probably otherwise not volunteer themselves to get arrested, actually saw the moment as absolutely necessary. And so that's what I believe our task is as organizers, is to make these moments of power building absolutely necessary and not just an option. Woo!
Thank you. You had mentioned one of the ways in which you shifted the narrative was around policing, was the questions that you were asking these electoral candidates. Trey, the question for you is, what kinds of questions should we be asking in this moment that would help define the narrative of where we are and where we need to go today?
Thank you for that, and thanks for the invitation by way of agenda to be on the panel. I am really blessed to be here with so many good comrades. So I know that we keep making jokes about it. And shout out to Phil and Dee Dee, who took the burden of being the first to go, so that I can write some notes down. I'm actually going to steal a page out of Cortland's book, because Cortland asks an important question that I think is still relevant right now, which is, do you want to be in protest or do you want to be in power, right? And I think that to me is a central foundation for the type of questions, or as a preface for the type of questions that we have to ask related to this panel, which is the power to define, right? And I think another central spin-off question is, what is the terrain that we are willing to fight on, right? because as I'm listening to Dee and Phil, who are representative of some of the earlier fights inside of the current iteration of the Black struggle movement, you know, Phil, when I think about the terrain that we have to fight on, I think one of the beautiful things about the current terrain is that we are able to fight with sound bites in the digital age in a way that we have not been able to do before, especially when Dream Defenders was fighting on terrain which was government property, right? As they sort of hijacked, took over, occupied the State House in Tallahassee, Florida, right? And I think that it is critical for us if we are going to define the terrain that we are fighting on, because right now we're fighting on the opposition terrain, right? We're on defense more than we are on offense. If we are going to define the terrain that we are fighting on, then that means that we have to become really bold and challenging in all of the spaces that we're at. I think right now we're good digitally, right? You know, like we figured out how to use, well, now it's called X, but you know, what's Twitter, Black Twitter, right? But we figured out how to use Twitter to amplify our messages, to share narratives. We figured out in some cases also how to use mass media in that same vein. We haven't figured out how to use the courts like our opposition has. That's the terrain that they chose to fight on during the Trump era, right? We haven't figured out how to use the legislators, right? The vast majority of legislation of states are majority right, Republican, right? And that comes with all the connotations. I'm not saying you have to be Democrat or Republican or whatever, you know, that whole spiel is. But it comes with a certain connotation when we think about the social and economic impact to Black people inside of this country, right? In some cases, the political party matters. We have fought in the streets since Cortland time, Judy time, you know, Snick time. And so I don't think that we have stopped fighting inside of the streets. I do think that that there's something that the homie Mo Mitchell talks about, who's now the head of the Working Family Party, when he talks about how there has to be a complementary electoral strategy to the movement's social justice strategy that we oftentimes are really good at. And he frames it this way. He says that we are really good at calling the question, right? Movement is really good at calling the question. George Floyd happened, Trayvon Martin happened, Mike Brown happened, Freddie Gray in my hometown happened, and we were really good at calling the question. We said, yo, does police need to exist? Do they need as much money? Should we be paying them to kill us, to terrorize us, to do all of these things? Is state-sanctioned violence a thing? Are they directly targeting Black people, right? We were really good at calling the question. But Mo's assessment was that we were not good at answering the question. We did not have the level of power that was necessary to answer the question. Our opposition, in my viewpoint, does have the level of power necessary to answer the question. So when 2020 happened, Trump lost, Biden won, they didn't just ask questions around did the election get stolen. They said we're going to take the fight to the state level. We're going to answer the questions that we are asking. And so what is the terrain that we are now willing to fight on? That's what I believe that the power to define has to encompass, one of those central questions. The last piece that I'll say is that, and this is something else that I stole from Cortland as well. So I'm just, you know, got to get the gems from, what was it somebody said? You got to pick up where the Snick elders left off at. One of the other things in a one-on-one conversation that we had that still resonates with me today is he I don't know if it was a question or if it was comment, call it, that you had made, but that our job is to build a new majority. And I would even say that our job is to build a new supermajority, right? And so when we think about what democracy means inside of this country, right, when we talk about what a multiracial democracy is, Cortland talks about how at the time that they were running the freedom schools, that they was doing the boycotts, at the time that Freedom Summer was being launched, all of those things, they were not the majority. Right? They were not the majority. Their job was to build a new majority. And so I think one of the central questions on the table for us is, are we prepared and ready to build a new majority? We are still, by all accounts in this country, a young democracy. You know, if you want to call it a democracy, that's a whole nother argument that we could have. But yeah, different panel. Thank you. But if you want to call it a democracy, we are still, in relative terms, a young democracy, but still a democracy that that my mentor Bob Moses says still haven't figured out what it means to be a full citizen, especially as it relates to black people, right? And so I think one of the central questions that then out of that we have to ask is, what does it mean to truly be a part of a democracy inside of the United States of America? And what is the majority that we are willing to build? And I do think that it has to encompass this idea that we also have to have the level of economic power necessary to be able to contend. And I know I said that was the last thing, but I do want to just I feel like I asked a lot of questions like, well, where's the hope at, right? You know, that's a lot of questions that maybe still need to be out there. But I do think that there is a number of things that we have already defined inside of this country. One of which is I think Dee Dee first touched on it, this idea of public safety and the over-reliance on police as we think about public safety, particularly in black communities, but in communities at large. There are people that are running dope experimentations of what it means to keep our community safe that does not have to rely on just police. I know Rachel is doing that work in Florida right now, in Miami with the Healing Center, right? There's some homies out in California and Seattle. We're trying to figure out some shit in Baltimore, so, come help a brother out. Right, excuse my language, sorry, Aldous. Some stuff in Baltimore. But the question that was called, particularly in 2020, right, or the new reiteration of it, help us to be able to define that police don't have to have so much money and that resources can, at bare minimum, be an experimentation moment for us to figure out what will actually keep our communities safe. And we know that in many cases, it's actually economic investment inside of these communities, right? Because folks want to talk about crime and all of that stuff. The second thing is the pandemic actually helped us to define what it means to have a base level income. I tell people all the time that as much as politicians and public officials like to say that universal basic income is impossible, these folks gave us stimulus checks because we said that you need, my bad, we said that we needed there was a base level of income that was necessary, right? And because of the massive amount of unemployment, of corporations not staying true to their, folks were still getting rich while people was getting laid off, right? That the government recognized that one, corporations had to be held accountable in some way, but that there was a necessity to make sure that people underneath of a certain income threshold receive some amount of payment to be able to sustain their basic needs and necessities. We can argue about if it's enough because I did not get enough. I deserved a bigger check. I'm still waiting on my check, and that is separate from my reparations. But it was a moment, a win for us because we defined that. Black people in particular defined that. Right? We said that this is nothing new to us. Mutual aid is something that we have always done inside of our community. Y'all are just becoming hip to it, right? But the level of income that was necessary to be given to those who were poor and working class was a necessity at the moment. It was actually a beautiful moment for us to define that we need to be telling that narrative because right now they're saying Yang and all these other folks created a universal basic income, which is just not true. And the last thing is that we defined, at least for the first time, and elders and Tiffany, Phil, and Dee Dee folks, correct me if I'm wrong, but we did define a national election for the first time that I can remember, right? Where for the first time, a candidate, president-elect, said that black people got him elected. Black people got him elected, right? That was a major moment, and it means that the black vote can really contend with the powers that be, even as a minority, quote unquote, in this country, right? And so we have to begin to, one, tell that story, share that victory, but also be clear that we defined an election. And we can do it again if the money is right, if what you are saying is backed up by your actions, and if you're willing to give me my reparations check.
Trey, you mentioned the importance of building and working towards a new majority. Tiffany, I imagine that one of the obstacles that we would face in that effort of building a new majority is confronting those who have accepted the narrative that change comes through the passage of time. That if we're just patient, if we don't rock the boat, things were worse. I recognize there's progress. Things were worse. Things have clearly gotten better than what they were. So why can't we just stay the course? How do you respond to those who would offer that as a way forward?
Thanks for the question. I'm gonna take personal privilege really quickly just to thank y'all for this space. And the panelists, my comrades, my brothers and sisters have said it, like, these are the folks that we're in the street with. But this is also the folks that we consider family. And I'm one of the folks who feels like the movement saved me and started this work because somebody hung a noose on my college dorm in college and made it all the way to North Carolina to come sit on this panel. Even if I wasn't on a panel, I would still be in this space with you all. So thank you is my offering to every single one of y'all, especially the folks who have really showed up for me in this moment as I'm experiencing heavy loss. And so I wrestle with this word, this definition, the word definition. I think spiritually right now I'm rejecting the notion of defining things because I just feel like I don't understand. And in my stubbornness to reject the word define, I am owning the word determine, because I feel like in my listening to y'all and taking a lot of notes is like really healing and incredible. I'm just thinking about all of the campaigns, spaces, agenda items, and relationships that I have been through in the last 12 years, and how as an organizer, as a practitioner, in the moment, I couldn't define what was happening or what we were going through, but knew that in that season, we were trying to at least determine what it was, and where we were going. And so this question around, like, people saying we have to stay the course, and that's like my uncle. Like I think about my uncle who's like, well, I'm not gonna vote because whatever's gonna happen is whatever's gonna happen. Like the determination is the power that we have. I don't think that power is like the definition of it, and this is just my relationship to the word in this season. I think the question is like, what's love got to do with it? What's definition got to do with it? Like, I'm not trying to actually understand this moment, and I think while I'm doing it, it's hard to understand it because I can't see the forest for the trees. I can just see the trees. And so after things have happened, we are able to debrief and dissect and identify the definition. We're able to interpret it. We're able to understand it better. But I do think that what we have been doing, to a lot of what Trey was saying, is determining what our future is going to look like, determining what should happen this moment, determining what the narrative should be, determining who should win the election, determining what safety should look like. And as we determine those things, it becomes a organizing opportunity for us to help people gravitate towards that determination, not understanding or the definition. And so if we say, like, we should live in a world with no police, which is still not a popular opinion in this country, even though we say it very clearly, it's not popular. There's a lot of things that we say deeply, but that are not widely felt. And so we have to continue to determine what that is. And I do think that comes with explanation, right? And sometimes we don't always have the answer to explain it. But the definition for me, I just feel like defining it in this season or trying to understand it in this season is just so much bigger than us, if that makes sense. And so the power to determine came when, I didn't understand. I remember, and I was on IG Live. Fuck y'all for talking about me as an influencer. But I brought my equipment if you want to have a conversation with me. I'm testing it out. Thank you, Charles, wherever he's at. I was on IG Live because I didn't know what else to do, and like I wasn't around y'all in this season, in this moment, sitting in front of the Oklahoma State Penitentiary with the family of Julius Jones. And I had been working on that campaign for 3 months, and in the city of Oklahoma, where my grandmother was born and raised, for about 3 weeks. And I remember the overwhelming, I don't have another word for it, but like pissed offness that I had, because I just felt like we could define the experience as being unjust, but we couldn't, and we tried to determine what the outcome should be, but like we couldn't win. At least that's what I was thinking in the moment. And that we couldn't win, even though like it didn't make any fucking sense. Like this person was not at the scene of the crime. The person had 20 minutes after 13 years in death row. They had 20 minutes on a Zoom to try to justify and explain to the world why they should not be executed. And the procedure of the 20 minutes was so fucking restricting. And all he wanted to do was talk. And it was like he couldn't just talk. He had to say certain things at certain times and answer certain questions at certain times. And sitting in front of that penitentiary for the very first time awaiting an execution was very scary and painful and like fucked up, traumatizing, almost a little too heavy. And I took some medicine. It was just too heavy. And then we got the news. We got the news, and then he got the news later. So we got the news about an hour before that they were going to stay the execution, but that he was still going to be on death row, and he still is on death row right now because they are claiming it's too unsafe for him to go into the popular part of the prison. And so they stayed the execution, and then they hadn't told him yet, and then they went in and they told him, and we didn't get to speak to him or anything that day. His family came back the following day, and I'm like, when we define what the judicial system is, when we define what when we try to, like, we can't define what violence is, we can identify what violence feels like. And I feel like our power is not enough to be in the definition of it. We have to determine what it is, and determining it, I feel like, puts the power back on us. I felt like I was able to determine at the NAACP what their civic engagement program was going to look like for the youth in college. They had nothing. I built it all. And now I have the confidence to say that. And I get to determine now with the flight attendants at Delta Airlines, like, what does this national campaign of organizing 28,000 people, workers in the sky look like across different time zones? Like, I'm not trying to understand the moment. And I think that that's something that I can be better at, and understand better how folks before me did it. But like in the moment, it's not that you're numb, it's just that it doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter what the definition is in the moment. Like, I'm not trying to understand or define it. I'm trying to determine and get to that point and help people. Cortland says this all the time, like, our job is to change the hearts and minds of people. And once we do that, and how we do that gives us a determination of where it is that we're going, to your question, right? And I think about this, the Nsay's quote, the midnight and the 3 a.m. And if anybody's ever had a really rough season, then you know that at like 12 o'clock, when you're still in the same day of the like pain, that it doesn't feel very good. And that you're really just waiting for the next day. You're like, I can't wait till this fucking day is over. I just really want to get to the next day. And the 3 a.m. is like 2 hours before the sunrise. And so that feeling of being already in the new day and not being in the midnight is where I find the hope that Trey is talking about, right? Like the 3 a.m. before the sunrise is where hope feels like, okay, now I get to kind of begin again. And I resonate with that difference, because midnight feels like, all right, I gotta hurry up and get to sleep because my panel's at 9 a.m. But if I sleep right now, I have 8.5 hours because I can get up and take a shower, brush my teeth in 20 minutes. But if it's 3 a.m. in the morning and your panel's at 9 a.m., then you're like, fuck, I got 5 hours of sleep, maybe 4.5, right? The time just feels closer to the new day. And I don't feel like it's my season to define what's happening. I feel like it's our season always, and responsibility always, to determine what that is. When I worked at the AFL-CIO, I was the program manager, coordinator, whatever the title was, for the Civil Human Women's Rights Department. Richard Trumka hired me after the murder of Michael Brown. The late Richard Trumka, president of the AFL-CIO, hired me after the murder of Michael Brown because he said we needed a young black person to help with the negotiations between workers and the community. And white people didn't know what they were doing. So they were like, we're going to hire black people to do it. And Carmen Berkeley, shout out to Carmen Berkeley, who I've known since my first year of college, she hired me to be the person there. And I remember my orientation meeting with the president and asking him, you know, feeling the weight of responsibility to fix racism in the labor movement, which was my job. And I asked him, I said, you know, I didn't ask him to define. He was a white guy. I was like, I'm not asking him to define it. I said, you know, what does success look like for you in this project? And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, it's like pornography. I'll know it when I see it. And I had the same reaction. That's what he said to me. I had the same reaction, and then I bursted out into tears and left. And Carmen was like, girl, don't let these white people fuck you up. And I was like, did you hear what he said to me, though? Like, the biggest shit has happened. Leslie McSpadden, Michael Brown's mother, was a member of the United Food and Commercial Workers. And that particular local in St. Louis endorsed Darren Wilson Day, the name of the police officer who murdered Michael Brown. And so I was hired to negotiate the relationships across the country between labor and community. And it started with like opening listening sessions and stuff like that. And so I'm just thinking, like, in that fucking moment, I don't know how to solve racism in the labor movement. I'm 23. But I could determine what our words were going to be, what words we weren't going to use, who was going to be in the room, who was not allowed to be in the room, what the agenda was going to be, what the questions were going to be, what our outcomes were going to look like, what the promises were, what the report was going to look like, what the training was going to be. And for 3 years, I did that work. And so I get to define, right? I mean, I get to determine what it's going to look like. But when he told me it was like pornography, he'll know when he sees that. I don't know what the fuck that means. So I was like, defining stuff for me right now feels not my responsibility, because spiritually, I'll get the definition later. It's like my role right now is to organize people power, to change the hearts and minds of people, to train folks to be able to do things for themselves if they don't have that skill set, and to be able to determine what our freedom's gonna look like in every phase of the struggle.
Thank you. The questions of determining what we do and how we do it in the moment, defining and having the not only the power, but sometimes the luxury to pause and define what it is that we are doing. But one thing is clear, that we know what we're fighting for, right? I mean, now how we articulate, what that freedom is may vary depending upon context and time. But we're clear about what we're fighting for. One of the things that struck me during, reading some coverage of the protests, as you were mentioning, in Ferguson, was the confusion, purposeful sometimes, unintentional other times, of media who were saying you have all these people who were taken to the streets and they don't know what they're fighting for, right? They had seized the power to define and determine that black folk had no idea what they were fighting for. So there is, whether we are able to do it in the moment, right, that has real consequences when I think other people project onto us what it is that we're doing.
Strategic, right?
Oh, absolutely, it's strategic. Absolutely, no accidents in that. Let's take a 10-minute break now, and we will. It's 10:40 now. We'll come back at 10:50, and we'll pick up and open up the conversation to invite you all into it. Okay? All right, thank you.